We've seen human beings crushed by tanks and bulldozers, tied up, executed, men, women, children, medical personnel, aid workers.
Zionism is colonialist in nature and in practice and in theory, in brutality and cruelty. We're always part of it. This is peak dehumanization. This is big Zionism, if I may say so. This is really the edge of the knife. And Israeli society has been going down for many years, and especially the last, I would say, a decade and a half or so, during which Netanyahu was like the sole ruler of everything.
So when you ask people about what happens next, right? What is the day after? What do people say? Do they have an answer?
They can't have this conversation. I don't want to make anybody my enemy, especially not Islam. Like, why would you make 2 billion people your enemy?
Before October, I could never have imagined even a slight crack in the solidarity between the West and and Israel.
I can see Western populations, not Western establishments. They have no crack. They're still full on. Israeli leadership is in an end of days mentality, in a kind of an apocalyptic mindset. Netanyahu would do anything to remain in power. Eventually, something bigger and more dangerous, more explosive is going to happen.
Welcome to today's talk. In the last 6 months, we've seen unimaginable horror perpetrated on the Palestinian people. We've seen entire neighborhoods bombed to rubble. We've seen entire families, entire bloodlines exterminated. We've seen children hunted and killed by snipers with the most high-tech military weaponry available to any army in the world. We've seen human beings crushed by tanks and bulldozers, tied up, executed, men, women, children, medical personnel, aid workers. And it's being done by soldiers joyfully. I mean, they're recording their own videos, they're recording TikToks, mocking their victims. They're posing with the lingerie of Palestinian women who have likely been killed or displaced or are in unimaginable grief right now. And we've seen images that are straight out of hell. And it seems, looking at it from an outside perspective, that that large part of Israeli society seems to be either indifferent or on board with it, and they want more. But there are voices of dissent, and I have the pleasure of speaking with one of them today, Mr. Alon Mizrahi, an Israeli author, columnist, and political activist. And Alon, thank you so much for joining us. And the first question that's been in my mind, and I think on a lot of people's minds, is what exactly is happening in Israeli society right now?
Thank you for having me, first of all. And as to Israeli society, I have to tell you, honestly, I'm living in it. I grew up here. I spent most of my life here. And I'm not sure I'm getting it. It's not fully explicable what's happening right now. I can explain some of it, and I have some good explanation to what's going on, but to really understand what Israel is going through right now and what is happening to it and what it's doing, I think we're going to need history for this. This is very hard to capture in real time. But I think the two things that you said, a part of it is indifferent, a part of Israeli society is indifferent, and the other part is on board with it. This is a very accurate description of what's going on. What we're seeing now, I mean, I've listened to the list of horrors that you read, and what we are seeing is a lesson in dehumanization that we never. I mean, we all know this word. now we see its full meaning, and what now we can see what practicing its full meaning looks like in real life. And the images that come out of Gaza are really, I think, are going to haunt us for the rest of our days. We're not going to forget it. I mean, we're in it day and night, all the time. It's in our dreams. For Israeli society, for Zionism as a movement, which always had this aspect of dehumanization for Palestinians, for really the natives of this land. Because however you portray it, Zionism is colonialist in nature and in practice and in theory. Zionists talked of themselves as colonialists. I mean, in the early days of Zionism, when it was acceptable. So there was always dehumanization for Palestinians, and it was brutality and cruelty were always part of it, because this is what you do to a group of people that you don't want, that you want them gone, that you want to hate. This is what you do, and this is how you talk about them. But I feel and I see that this long process that is going on for a century or so is really reached its terrible peak. This is peak dehumanization. This is peak Zionism, if I may say so. This is really the edge of the knife that we have come to know, and it is so terribly sad, because not only because of all the pain and suffering that we're seeing, but also because of what it foretells for so many other people, for human society, really, for human family. Because I want to speak this language, and I think we need a world community that speaks this language and leaves behind all this nonsense, the divisions and separations. Okay, we may have different traditions, different languages, different backgrounds, all good and fine, but we can't have hierarchies. We can't have people who are worthy of political rights and human rights and people who are not. We can't have that. And this genocide takes us back as a human society so much. It does such a terrible damage to all of us.
But you talk about society, right? I mean, we all see the same images. You see them, right? You have a different perspective. But then I look at I see what Israeli government officials have to say. I see the kind of debate taking place on Israeli media, where they're actually running pictures of detained Palestinians almost being tortured, like it's an entertainment show. I've been in Telegram groups, the Israeli Telegram groups with with 200,000, 300,000 members, called Dead Terrorists, in which they're making fun of Hind Rajab, the 6-year-old girl who was crushed, another man who was crushed flat by a tank, and even right now with the World Central Kitchen, the people killed there. I mean, I'm not even going to repeat the kind of language that's being used. What kind of collective psychopathy is this? Because that's what it seems like from the outside. I mean, the world sees an image and they're horrified. The majority of people, I think, in the world now. But it seems that for a lot of people in Israel, I mean, this is something that they're happy to see, that they're cheering it on. I mean, colonialism, I understand colonialism, but this is something far beyond that, right? It's some kind of collective madness. How did it ever get there?
I have a perspective of some decades, in Israel, which I lived through, as an Israeli citizen, and I could see and feel very clearly the sort of degradation that Israeli society went through. I mean, it was terrible in the Nakba already in 1948. you keep on doing this stuff with impunity. And I think that every new generation becomes worse and worse and worse, because you cannot freeze the kind of the moral level of a society. Either it's progressing towards a better and a more equal and more normal existence,
Or it's going down.
And Israeli society has been going down for many years, and especially the last, I would say, a decade and a half or so, during which Netanyahu was like the sole ruler of everything. And he created, I mean, the grains were there. It was always there, but it became a lot darker. It became a lot darker, and he like unleashed those very dark psychological forces that, I mean, every human society has them, but normal or healthy human societies take care to not give them power, to not empower them, to not legitimize them. But you can see over this period of time and throughout the many decades, it's not just this one, but this one, it took on a darker turn in the way it spoke about what Israel can do and what it feels it's allowed and entitled to do. And this happened on both sides of the Israeli map, of the political map, both the right and the left, because I remember this vividly. Around 2010, 2011, there was the big wave of demonstrations in Israel, and they were all they were focused around the economic situation, about the cost of living and this kind of stuff. And you could almost see the shift. I mean, because traditionally you had left-wing parties and movements in Israel and organizations who spoke about the occupation, who made it visible to a degree. It wasn't easy, and it didn't always just happen miraculously in public understanding and public media, but it was there. But in those years, in 2010, 11, the occupation just disappeared. And the little presence that Palestinians had in the Israeli psyche disappeared with it. And so the occupation stopped being an issue, and we have to understand what it means. It means a society that does this kind of a military occupation of the same number of people as you have citizens in your own state. I mean, it's a society ruling over a similar sized society, using military dictatorship and technology and everything that it has access to. Israel became a society that does this, but doesn't talk about it. It became totally repressed. And when things are repressed like this, and they are shady and dangerous and dark and sadistic anyway, but when they become this repressed, I think it drives society crazy. It drives us. I mean, if there's one lesson I'm taking from this really dark period of time, is how crucial it is for a society, and big or small. It can be a family, it can be a town, it could be a street. How crucial it is for any society to be able to speak about its problems and challenges and difficulties openly, and not be afraid of being perceived as wrongdoing. You have to accept this risk, and you have to face whatever it is that you're doing wrong, because every society does something wrong. But when there is a taboo around talking about it, and which means there's a group of people we are legitimized in really oppressing, and killing and displacing and disenfranchising in any way possible. So this sends a society over the cliff, and this is what happened to Israeli society.
It's like this poison accumulated and it's just sort of burst out. How are you an exception to this? Because I mean, I follow you on Twitter. I mean, that's why how we got in touch and why I'm talking to you. I mean, and I read your tweets. I mean, you're very, very outspoken. When you talk to your fellow Israelis like that, I mean, I'm assuming you do. What kind of reactions do they get? I mean, I bet that's not a popular opinion. The kind of opinions you have.
No, it's not to say the least. It's not a popular opinion. I used to have a Facebook page in Hebrew, and I wasn't like the biggest Facebook account in Hebrew, but it was very active. It had tens of thousands of followers and friends, and a few weeks after October 7th, I just shut it down because I could feel there is really no one to talk to.
No.
And I wasn't saying things that like, you are terrible people for what you're doing. I was trying to get people to pay attention to. I was saying stuff like, listen, there is a tomorrow after this. We have to think about it. How are we going to go abroad to other places? How are we going to be received? Will anyone want to work with us? Work for us? Be part of our lives? How will we be able to look people in the eye? Muslim people from places other than the Middle East, like Pakistan or Malaysia or Indonesia, not small countries by any means. But you can see this like a society hell-bent, just like the IDF is hell-bent on escalation and always trying to make things worse, which I don't get. I don't get it. Because if you have self-preservation, you want to calm things down. You are not trying to always make the fight more terrible, and more total for everybody involved.
So when you ask people about what happens next, right? What is the day after? What do people say? Do they have an answer?
They can't have this conversation. They can't have, and this relates to what I told you earlier about the what is legitimate to talk about and what is not. Because when a subject it's that thing we don't speak of, this expands because you always have to hide it and not come near it and not let things that are associated with it, be spoken of. So this like dark hole expands and it swallows up the whole culture. And eventually there's nothing much to talk about in the way of, political analysis of which is life, really. I mean, the power relations, the future we're going to have, the image we have, the international relationships, the economy, all this very important stuff. It doesn't exist in the conversation.
You spoke about impunity and you spoke about hierarchies, and we know, I mean, this is a reality. There's a hierarchy to the value of human life, right? 30,000.
This makes me so angry, this is what gets me. This is what gets me. This is what makes me talk in a society that doesn't want to hear it. I can't accept it. I can't accept it. It drives me crazy to say that a child in Gaza is expendable because he is Arab or Muslim or brown. It's killing me. I don't know. I feel like being caught in this horror story where someone sees something that everybody else don't see, like the monster that like is allowed to roam free. This is what it feels like. This is so dangerous. And I mean, this is terrible and unacceptable in any society. But I think for Jews especially, I'm not sure I even have the word for it, but this accentuates it even further.
Yeah,
Because
given the history.
I mean the whole idea of Zionism. I mean, let's put aside the colonialism and let's put aside the good and just claims that Palestinians had. Zionism is based, and the foundation of Israel is based on a moral claim. We have been mistreated, so now we want to be rehabilitated. This is a big part of it. Yes, it's our ancestral homeland, or this is how the story goes. But the injustice that we experienced, Jews experienced, especially European Jews, I think that Jews in Arab and Muslim countries didn't have this experience the way European Jews did. But to get your country, to get the support of the international community, voting for your country to be established, and then behaving like this as a group which is in itself a small minority group. I mean, Jews are a small group and they have to be so much wiser. And this is why I can't, one of the other things I can't understand is how many spokespeople for the Israeli government and Jewish organization in the United States talk about Israel as a defender of the West in its fight against Islam. I mean, for me as a Jew, this I want to be the least prominent human being on earth. I don't want to be. I don't want to poke my finger in anybody's eye. I don't want to make anybody my enemy, especially not Islam. Like, why would you make 2 billion people your enemy? And why would you presume to represent the West or Europe or white Europe that was so cruel to you for all this long time? I mean, what's happening, it doesn't make sense on so many levels. I mean, the cruelty, the sheer stupidity, the historical stupidity, because there is gonna be a tomorrow. And we're gonna have to explain what happened. And I'm not sure we're gonna be able to in any way that's reasonable to anyone.
You talked about impunity, Alon, and of course Western support. And we know, I mean, like when I was talking about the hierarchies of human life, right? 30,000, over 30,000 dead Palestinians really didn't get the West to even mildly condemn Israel. I'm talking about the US, the UK, Canada, Germany, or Germany still hasn't said anything, Australia. But recently there was an attack on the World Central Kitchen's aid workers. And as horrible as it is to say this, we know that's the reality, that's the reason why there's been something of a shift. I was watching British media, I was watching US media, Morning Joe, and they're actually asking the kind of questions they should have been asking on October 9th, October 10th, October 11th. But okay, better late than never. Before October, I could never have imagined even a slight crack in the solidarity between the West and and Israel. Do you see the beginning of the end of that impunity and that blank check and that blind support from the West?
Yeah, I can see it on a popular level. I can see Western populations, not Western establishments. They have no crack. They're still full on. But I can see among Western populations, right wingers and left wingers, same thing. You can see an understanding that this infinite impunity, that we are gonna support Israel whatever it does, no matter how many people it kills, no matter how brazen and insensible what it's doing. This is beginning to ebb, I would say. People are and understandably so. I mean, the images coming out and the fact that Israel is not acknowledging this creates really the dehumanization has proven itself to be a double-edged sword in this genocide, because I think what Israel is doing is it's dehumanizing itself. Israel is dehumanizing itself, because when you are willing to kill so many people, like robotically, without shedding a tear, without even saying, oh, this is really terrible, it's awful, I have to do this, which you don't have to, but nevertheless, express any emotion, acknowledge that other people are horrified by it. The fact that Israel is never bothers to do it creates such a terrible image of Israel, I think. I think this would have looked completely different if Israeli representatives were capable of showing empathy or humanity. And of course, Israel wouldn't act the way it acts if this was part of its psyche.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, because there's always this psychological warfare element to it, always trying to present Palestinians as, human animals. You can feel it was a campaign from really the get-go, because everybody started using, when everybody does something at the same times, it feels synchronized. So the use of this language, human animals, and they don't get that what the world sees, when you see someone say about someone else that they are human animals, you immediately dislike them. You say, I get conflict, I get animosity, but when you are this committed to total psychological destruction of the other side, something is wrong with you. Something is wrong with you. And this gives it away, this kind of language. So this whole campaign that Israel is waging of trying to destroy Palestinians, and by extensions, Arabs and Muslims, and present them as amoral, as bad people, corrupt, violent, and so on, it's backfiring spectacularly. It is really killing Israeli reputation.
Yeah, I think it has. You spoke about the Arab and the Muslim world. So it's interesting to me that not very long ago, the Abraham Accords were signed. Okay. And UAE, Bahrain, UAE established diplomatic relations. Right, and it seemed that Saudi Arabia would be next to follow. And right now, just a little while ago, the news came in that even the UAE has suspended diplomatic cooperation with Israel. Now, I don't know what exactly diplomatic cooperation means. I know that the Israeli ambassador to the UAE ambassador to Israel was sitting at iftari dinner next to the Israeli president. But to go from there to a position in which Israel seems to be hell-bent on escalating the war, striking Lebanon, destroying the US, the Iranian consulate, the Iranian embassy in Syria, even to the point that even if it's performative, their closest ally in the Arab world, the UAE, has had to, take some kind of action, right? What kind of mentality? Because I want to see, I know I keep asking this question over and over again, but what kind of mentality sets fire to its own policy? Or is the whole policy simply to just, set the entire region on fire deliberately?
I think you asked this question because it is so required and it's so called for, because it doesn't make sense. No. This is not what you do when you think of that you have a tomorrow. And I think that is quite clear that the Israeli leadership is in an end of days mentality, in a kind of an apocalyptic mindset. And when you're in this mindset, you don't think about consequences because you're all in. Either we all die, or you all die, or we defeat you all, or you destroy and uproot all of us. This is the only conclusion I can get from this.
When you say apocalyptic, you mean that literally, right? Because I mean, we've had Netanyahu talking about, the seed of Amalek, Joshua ben Adam, so on and so forth. We've seen Israeli soldiers in Gaza wearing the third temple patch, right? And we know that there's groups like the Temple Institute. I know Ariel Sharon, and there have been attempts to do that. When you say the apocalypse, do you mean it literally, like in the religious sense, they're trying to bring about an apocalypse?
I think there's a very dangerous mix of military capabilities and wacko religious ideas and initiatives, and it creates and they're allowed to coexist in a way that doesn't get you anywhere good. This is how I would describe it. I mean, traditionally in Israel, you had these fringe groups that had these visions of reestablishing the Jewish temple, over which according to Jewish halakha, you are not allowed to ever do this. This is the role of the Messiah. You don't accelerate or bring about the end of days. This is what God does when God decides that it's the right time. So, but some fringe elements in Israeli religious society took this role upon themselves, and usually they were very fringe, a small group of people. The very far right, extreme radicals with no political sway. I mean, in larger Israeli society. But during this past decade or so, when Netanyahu was pushed and became more and more dependent or obsessed about remaining in power, he had to bring in all the elements in Israeli society that traditionally were left out. The super extreme, the super radical right. People no other government would ever dream of, like Ben Gvir, making Ben Gvir a minister. This is unthinkable in Israel of like 15 years ago. There's no way this passes. But now Netanyahu feels, and again he handles his own political survival with the same apocalyptic mindset. He has to stay prime minister, whatever the consequences, whatever he has to do, whoever he has to join forces with. And this wasn't always the case in Israel. People knew that there comes a time when you become less popular, when you're not at your best performance, so you make way and let someone else take the reign. But Netanyahu won't do it. Netanyahu would do anything to remain in power. So you have all these processes working together to make reality more and more disturbed.
So to sum it up, you got a prime minister who can happily set the entire region on fire just to stay in power for a little while longer. You've got actual religious fanatics in positions of extreme power in a state funded heavily by the United States and the West, armed with the best military technology in the world, with nuclear weapons. You have a military more than happy to murder anyone who gets in their paths, and a civilian population, or a population which has either got its eyes closed or is cheering it on. Would that be accurate?
this is harsh but accurate. Yeah, yeah,
My God.
yeah. And we all have this feeling that something's got to give. Eventually, something bigger and more dangerous, more explosive is going to happen. I mean, either that or the US actually, I mean, pulls the plug on this and says, okay, you got to stop, no more ammunition, no more veto. And this, which, I mean, we didn't talk about it, but this terrible international shame where the UN Security Council, which was established to prevent this, to stop situation like this. We can't have, as a human society, this kind of thing happening for so long, and it was like disabled by the US. So I don't get what Israel's end game is. I mean, apart from apocalypse, which I don't know what to think about it. But what's the US end game in this? I mean, why aren't they stopping it? I mean, there were many times in history where the US presidents told Israeli prime ministers, enough. I mean, this minute, enough. You can't do this. You can't have this operation. You have to stop, go back. Many times in Israeli history, it's documented. Many people know it. But this time they insist this needs to go on. And I think this is part of the reason we like, for so many people, the very sense of reality is being questioned and or broken in a way. What's going on? How is it not stopped? How can the State Department spokesperson keep peddling the same nonsense
with a smirk on his face? Yeah, it's like you're watching some crazy, insane nightmare parallel dimension. I think you tweeted recently, and I can't remember the exact words, but something about the myth of Western credibility is also buried in the graveyards of Gaza. I think you wrote that, or you didn't.
What can you repeat that?
Like, Western credibility is also buried in Gaza. I don't know if you wrote that or somebody else wrote that.
I said Western culture.
Western culture
died in Gaza. And this genocide, it's a funeral procession. Yeah, because when you have a society, I'm talking about the West now.
Yeah.
When you have a society without dissent, this makes my skin crawl.
Yeah.
No matter if it's right or wrong or whatever, if it's agriculture, medicine, I don't know, whatever, gardening. When you have this like terrible unity, no one dares say, listen, I think you're wrong. I think you're getting it wrong. I think you're doing something terrible. I won't be a part of it. I'm resigning. When you have this kind of unity, this tells me that, like, this is a big thing to say, but I really feel it. That allowing this genocide to go on for so long without dissent on any meaningful level, this tells me that the West, as a philosophical, as a cultural movement, is really is fundamentally broken.
Yeah,
fundamentally broken. And what this genocide showed me is that so many societies, that Western propaganda, now I can say propaganda, all those societies the West told us are primitive, they don't have morals, they don't understand justice, and suddenly you see it's the opposite. It's the opposite, because everywhere in the West where you have resistance, it's led by Muslims, it's led by Palestinians, sometimes by Jews who defect in this way, but all the global South actually talking about it the way we are talking about it, and it's clear to any Pakistani. I think this is wrong. This is wrong. Whatever you think about so-called conflict, which is not really a conflict, this is oppression and occupation, and so on. This is something that can't be allowed to happen. And giving this kind of sponsorship as the US does, this is really boggles the mind.
It does boggle the mind. Alon, thank you.
Really damages US standing in the West.
It does. I think the Gaza has been the end of many things, including a great many illusions. Alon Mizrahi, thank you so much for your time. I hope we get the chance to talk again in better days.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Take care, man.